I was walking through one of those massive public housing estates on the outskirts of Osaka recently, the kind of donchi built in the 70s to house the miracle generation. At first glance, it feels like a graveyard for a lost era. Rusted playgrounds, sun-bleached curtains, and a heavy, oppressive silence. But then, the sensory data shifts. You catch the scent of turmeric and cumin wafting from a fourth-floor window. You hear a group of young men speaking rapid-fire Nepali by the bicycle racks. I met an old man there, one of the few original residents left. He was meticulously sweeping the pavement, a habit from a world that doesn't exist anymore. When I asked him about his new neighbors, he gave me this hollow, detached smile. "It's better this way," he said. "At least the lights are on." He seemed almost relieved that the building wasn't being demolished. But then he leaned in, his voice dropping to a sharp whisper, and complained bitterly about how they didn't understand the complex rules of garbage disposal or the hush of the hallways. He was caught in a bizarre psychological pincer. He needed these foreigners to keep his world from being condemned by the city, yet he felt like a ghost in his own home. It was a perfect, localized snapshot of a much larger, colder reality. What we're seeing in these Nepali islands isn't a story of vibrant multiculturalism or a successful melting pot. It's a clinical look at a biological vacuum. To the local bureaucrats, this is a revitalization project, a way to keep the tax base alive and the residential containers full. But beneath the managerial jargon lies a more profound entropy. We are witnessing the final, technical management of a civilizational winter where the state has stopped trying to fix the collapse of the family and has started simply filling the empty rooms with a new population to keep the machinery running. It's a demographic stopgap applied to a terminal wound. Wow. That story, that image of the donchi, the old man sweeping a pavement that doesn't really feel like his anymore, it's just heavy. It's a heavy way to start.
But it's also the perfect metaphor, isn't it? It's the perfect, grim entry point for everything we're going to unpack today.
Absolutely,
right.
Because this isn't just a story about Osaka or Japan. You read that and you immediately feel the echoes of it in the West, in our universities, in our militaries, even in our own neighborhoods.
That's the core of it. That image is the foundational one for this whole discussion. And the mission, I think, for this deep dive is to really look past the usual labels we use.
Right. We say multiculturalism or bureaucracy, and we think we've explained something.
Exactly. We need to get under that. We need to see the deeper engine that's running here. What the sources we're looking at are calling civilizational entropy. And more specifically, how that entropy is being, well, hidden in plain sight by what's called the managerial state.
And I think that's the thesis we need to be really clear on from the start. The argument we're exploring today is, it's quite provocative. It's that our institutions, this managerial class, they're not really in the business of fixing things anymore.
No, the project has changed.
It's changed completely. They're not trying to, say, rebuild the family or restore social cohesion or even, win wars in the way we used to think about winning.
They're managing the decline. That's the perfect phrase for it. They are overseeing the winter.
Yes. They're using administrative tricks, all these metrics, these therapeutic interventions. It feels like they're just trying to mask the fact that the actual structure, the house itself, is rotting away.
They are filling the empty rooms. It goes right back to that opening story. Keep the lights on, keep the subsidies flowing, and don't look too closely at the fact that the original family has moved out and died.
Okay, so let's pull on that first thread, this idea of a global convergence of these managerial strategies. Let's go back to Osaka, to that man, Sato, in the donchi.
Right.
The story I read about him, it's just so powerful. This is a man who remembers when those buildings were symbols of the Japanese miracle. Everything was standardized, clean, filled with these perfect nuclear families, all living out the same social script.
A coherent world.
A completely coherent world. And today he walks through those same hallways, and the silence of his dead or departed neighbors has been replaced by the smell of Nepalese spices and languages he can't understand.
And the analysis points out something crucial. It's not a clash of civilizations. That's not what he's experiencing.
No, it's quieter than that. It's a replacement. It's the feeling of becoming a ghost in your own home. And the local government, they aren't even trying to integrate these new people.
There's no Japanese way of life to integrate them into anymore. That's the whole point. The project is just fill the floor space, keep the administrative subsidies flowing.
It's just devastatingly clinical. And it leads to this one conclusion that really stopped me in my tracks. When a society loses its will to reproduce its own culture, the state's function changes.
It stops being a protector of a people
and becomes just a landlord of a territory, Demographic collapse isn't a tragedy to be mourned, it's a logistical problem. It's an inventory issue.
A landlord of a territory. I mean, that phrase is it. That's the key that unlocks the whole concept of the managerial state. And to really get why this is happening, you have to go back to the theory. You have to look at thinkers like James Burnham and later Samuel Francis.
Right, Burnham. He was the one who saw this coming, back in the 40s? He described the rise of this new ruling class that wasn't your traditional capitalist, and it wasn't socialist either. It was something new.
It was something new. In the old model, the owner of the factory, the capitalist, runs the factory. He holds the power. In a democracy, the elected officials make the laws. But Burnham saw that the world was becoming too complex. Power wasn't in ownership anymore.
It was shifting to the administrators.
Exactly. The bureaucrats, the experts, the technicians, the social engineers, the people who don't own the means of production, but they manage the organizations that do. And their motivation is completely different.
It's not about profit. And it's definitely not about the will of the people.
No, their primary motivation is the health, the growth, and the self-preservation of the bureaucracy itself. The organization must survive. The organization must expand.
So if we apply that to Sato and his Danchi, the managerial goal is not, let's create a thriving, cohesive Japanese neighborhood.
Of course not. That's a messy, unquantifiable human goal. The goal is maintain 98% occupancy rates to qualify for central government subsidies. Full stop.
And if the original population is literally dying out, which is the entropy we're talking about,
the managerial class doesn't have the tools or, frankly, the moral authority to fix the spiritual crisis causing that decline. That's way too hard. That's not on their spreadsheet.
So they look at the spreadsheet. We have 500 empty units. We need 500 occupants. It's a math problem.
It's a math problem. So they import the occupants, problem managed. The KPI is green. The community might be completely dead, the social fabric shredded, but the metric looks good.
It's the replacement of law with administrative decree. Politics becomes social engineering. And that's the scary part. This isn't just some weird thing happening in Japan. This is the operating system of the modern West.
And you see the most direct parallel in how our own universities and corporations are handling diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Let's talk about that. There's an argument from the Catalyst Journal that frames DEI in a way that most people don't think about. It says, forget whether it's morally good or bad for a second. Look at it as an elite class strategy.
A strategy that serves the interests of what they call the professional managerial class, the PMC. The parallel is one-to-one. Just like those bureaucrats in Osaka use immigration numbers to mask a dying tax base.
Western institutions use DEI metrics to mask the death of meritocracy.
And to mask their total failure to address real material economic inequality. It's the perfect managerial solution.
So it functions as a kind of bureaucratic replacement for actual merit. If you can't, for example, fix the fact that tuition is completely out of control, or that the curriculum is getting watered down,
or that the ladder of social mobility is broken for the middle class,
you manage the optics, you change the subject, you create this massive, complex, and ever-expanding bureaucracy of diversity officers, compliance training, bias reporting systems.
And look what that does. It creates thousands of new jobs for managers. It expands the administrative state within the institution. It gives them more power, more budget.
And it creates this perfect facade of progress. Look how virtuous we are. Meanwhile, the underlying structure, the actual quality of the education, the economic fairness of the system is still rotting.
It allows the elite to feel like they're doing something important. They get to police language, control behavior, act as these moral gatekeepers, all while ignoring the material reality that the house is falling apart. The actual economic engine is sputtering.
It's the same logic. Don't fix the fundamental problem. Manage the symptoms with a new layer of administration.
And this mindset, this idea of managing instead of winning or fixing, it has even penetrated the military, which is, maybe the last place you'd expect to find it.
Yeah, that analysis in Strategy in the Last Manager is pretty shocking. It talks about how the entire field of war studies has been captured by this managerial thinking.
It's a fundamental shift in worldview. It describes moving away from someone like Clausewitz,
who saw war as this primal, violent clash of wills to achieve a clear political objective, victory.
Right. From that to seeing war as a project management problem. It's about branding, metrics, stakeholder engagement, KPIs.
And the result of this, the analysis argues, is a cult of failure without consequence.
Look at the last 20 years. Iraq, Afghanistan. By almost any traditional strategic metric, you could argue they were failures. We didn't achieve the stated political goals.
But did the managerial class fail? Did the generals, the defense contractors, the think tank consultants, did they lose their jobs?
No, of course not. They hit their bureaucratic targets. They managed the logistics. They ran the programs. They filed the reports. In the managerial state, successfully running the process is more important than achieving the victory. Managing the war is the new winning the war.
So what you're describing is a single class of people, a single mindset that is now managing the decline of our communities, managing the decline of our universities, and managing the decline of our strategic power.
But that brings us to the really fundamental question. We've talked about the how, but we need to get to the why. Why is the decline happening in the first place? Why is there a biological vacuum in that Osaka Danchi? Why is there this cultural vacuum in the West?
And that pivot takes us to the root cause. It takes us to the family.
To the collapse of the family. This is the psychological and sociological core of the entire problem.
Okay, so let's introduce the second narrative here. This one shifts the focus to the internal psychological state of the younger generation, the people who have grown up entirely inside this managed world.
What does it feel like to be them?
Well, I was reading this account from a student at a really elite Western university, and they were describing this suffocating atmosphere on campus, where the very idea of merit has become a dirty word.
It's seen as problematic.
Exactly. It's been replaced by this incredibly complex bureaucratic system of identity and DEI mandates. And the student talked about their friend, who had just joined the most radical anti-Zionist protests on campus.
Okay.
But the key insight was why. The student said it wasn't because their friend had this deep historical understanding of the conflict. It was because they had a desperate, almost primal need to belong to something, anything.
To find an identity.
To find an identity in a world where all the traditional sources of identity are gone. The family structure is dissolved for many of them. Religion is seen as a relic. And so they're suffering from what the sociologists call anomie.
Rootless wandering.
Yes, just adrift. So they latch onto these huge global grievances as a kind of therapy for their own internal emptiness, their own entropy.
It's a very strange form of modern narcissism, isn't it? The argument is that the self is so hollowed out, so empty, that it has to be filled with the loudest, most divisive political identity it can find.
You look at that and you can't help but feel a mix of pity and, honestly, alarm. It's like the managerial class has traded actual intellectual pursuit for a system of social engineering that just rewards performative outrage.
And leaves a generation of young people completely adrift because they have no solid ground, no home or family in the deep sense to stand on.
You use the word anomie. That is the absolute critical concept here. It's that feeling of normlessness, being untethered. And it connects directly to the work of Christopher Lasch, specifically his redefinition of narcissism.
Right. Most people hear narcissism and they think of someone with a huge ego, someone who loves themselves. But that's not what Lasch meant at all, was it?
Not even close.
For
Lasch, the core of the clinical definition of narcissism was helpless dependence.
Helpless dependence.
Okay, so the theory goes like this. We're all born in a state of what's called primary narcissism. As an infant, you are the center of the universe. You are helpless, completely dependent on your mother, and you don't distinguish between yourself and the world.
Right. You cry and food appears. The world served you.
Exactly. Now, historically, the institution that helped us grow out of that infantile state was the family. Specifically, what Lasch called the 19th century bourgeois family. You had to navigate the authority of the father and the love of the mother, and through that process of socialization, you developed a stable, independent self.
You internalized their authority and values and became an adult.
But the managerial state, for its own reasons, has spent the last century systematically undermining the authority of the family.
It saw the family as a competitor, an obstacle to its own power.
So we've replaced the authority of the parents with what Lasch called the helping professions, the therapeutic state.
The social workers, the school counselors, the therapists, the parenting experts.
Yes. And the subtle but constant message from the state to parents is, you are not the experts on your own children. We are. Let us manage their development, their education, their psychology.
And the result of this, according to Lasch, is that we never fully complete that process of growing up. We remain in the state of suspended development. We're still dependent, but now we're dependent on the state, on experts, on the institution for our validation and our sense of self. Just like an infant is dependent on its mother.
And this leads to this really dark psychological place. Lasch describes it as a longing to be free from longing, a kind of death drive, an empty self.
Which perfectly describes that student you mentioned. And it leads to what another source calls a silent emotional disintegration.
I found that source fascinating. It was a paper on family breakdown as a driver of terrorism. And it made the point that family breakdown isn't just about divorce rates.
No, it's much deeper. It's about the emotional vacuum that can exist even in physically intact homes. The family is there, but it's not performing its function. It's not providing identity, meaning, or moral framework. It creates this huge psychological void.
And nature abhors a vacuum. Something has to rush in to fill it.
That's where radicalization comes in. That student joining the protests, from this perspective, they're not really a political actor, not in the way we'd normally think of one.
No. The anti-Zionist fervor, or whatever the cause of the day is, it's not primarily about the issue itself. It's a therapeutic attempt to cure their own enemy.
They're trying to fill that empty self with the loudest, most righteous identity available because they don't have a real self that was built by a strong family and a coherent culture.
And these ideologized friendships, as the paper calls them, they become the alternative family. They provide the belonging, the meaning, the purpose that was missing.
So we have this vicious cycle. The managerial state creates the vacuum by attacking and replacing the family, and then it steps in to manage the chaotic results, the mental health crises, the radicalization, with more bureaucracy, more therapy, more programs.
But there has to be a cost for all this. A society built on these principles, it must be incredibly fragile. There has to be a geopolitical price to pay.
And that is the third act of this tragedy, the consequences on the world stage.
Okay, so let's pivot to that. Let's look at the third narrative. This is the view from the war room, from the strategic level.
Stakes.
The stakes. Imagine you're a military strategist. You're looking at a map of a great Western power, and you have this horrifying realization that the country's capacity to defend itself isn't just about tanks and missiles anymore.
No, it's about something much more fundamental.
It's about whether the people living within those borders still feel like a people. Do they share a common identity, a common story?
And the argument in one of these reports is that the deliberate dilution of that national identity, which we see in Osaka with the administrative management and in the West with the fracturing of social cohesion, has created what they call a resilience gap.
A resilience gap.
Yes. Because when a population is no longer bound by a shared history, a shared culture, a sense of kinship, the collective will to sacrifice for the common good just evaporates.
Why would it not? If the person living next door is just a fellow resident in an economic zone, or worse, a member of a competing identity group, why would you stand with them to defend the nation against an adversary?
You wouldn't. The social contract is broken, and the administrative state, in its quest for manageable metrics and short-term stability, has completely prioritized that over long-term national survival.
It really feels like a kind of civilizational exhaustion. From this perspective, you see that the managerial class isn't just misguided. They're trading away the nation's strategic backbone for the illusion of administrative order.
The resilience gap. That's the terrifying reality of it. And there's this fantastic concept from Beth Kuntz's work that explains it perfectly, the termites and the tornado.
Right. The tornado is the obvious threat.
It's the kinetic war. It's the missile strike, the invasion, the things you see on the news. And we spend trillions of dollars reinforcing the roof of the house to protect against the tornado.
But we're completely ignoring the termites.
We're ignoring the termites. The slow, silent loss of social cohesion that is eating away the very foundation of the house. Because social cohesion, that sense of shared identity and trust, is the absolute bedrock of national defense.
Without trust between citizens and between citizens and their institutions, you can't mobilize a society for a collective defense. It's impossible.
How do you ask a population of atomized, therapeutic, narcissistic individuals to sacrifice, to endure hardship, for a nation they've been taught to believe is fundamentally illegitimate or is at best just an economic zone?
You can't. And this is where the geopolitical threat becomes so acute. This is where hybrid warfare comes in. The Senate Intelligence Committee report on Russia, the Khan Review in the UK, they all point to the same thing.
And it's so important to get this right. Hostile actors like Russia, they don't create the divisions in our societies.
They're not that powerful.
They don't need to be. They just exploit the existing lack of cohesion. They don't put the termites in the foundation. They just find the hollow wood and they start tapping on it.
They use information warfare, social media, to amplify the us versus them narratives that are already there.
The very narratives that the managerial state often encourages through its focus on identity politics and group grievance.
So the state itself is creating the vulnerabilities that our adversaries are now weaponizing.
It's the ultimate irony. The managerial state created the social vacuum by destroying the family and local community. It then filled that vacuum with divisive identity politics. And now, that very division is being exploited by our geopolitical rivals to weaken us from within.
The state is clinically managing its own demise.
It's exactly that. We have traded our strategic backbone for a sense of administrative order that turns out to be an illusion. We have a house divided, not by some tragic accident of history,
but by the deliberate design of a ruling class that thought it could manage away human nature, that thought it could manage history itself.
And now the bill is coming due.
It's just, it's such a complete and devastating picture of entropy when you lay it all out like that. You start with a biological vacuum in that apartment block in Osaka,
which is mirrored by the psychological vacuum in the soul of that student at the elite university,
which then manifests as the strategic vacuum at the level of the nation state, in the war room. It all connects.
It's one single process playing out at different scales.
And it feels like a betrayal, a fundamental betrayal of the social contract, this managerial class. They're no longer even attempting to fix the core problems. They're not trying to fix the family or rebuild the nation.
No, they're just managing the civilizational winter. They're keeping the spreadsheets tidy while the civilization freezes to death.
They're like watchmen on the wall who have decided that as long as the paperwork is filed correctly, it doesn't really matter that the city is on fire.
The process is the purpose. The rest is just data.
We are witnessing the final technical management of a civilizational winter. The state has stopped trying to fix the collapse of the family and has started simply filling the empty rooms with a new population to keep the machinery running.